Hey, Java Asyncs, welcome to week 4 of Java Asynchronous Online at CCAC. It's good to see you. Well, I guess I'm not seeing you. Hope you're seeing me. It's nice to be hoped to be seen. In this video, I'd like to give you a week overview of what we got cooked up for the week, then show you an example of our compiling exercise. It's a worksheet, and a review of our work forms, and then finally take some questions from that work form. So I've got the module set up for week 4. Let's jump into a quick screen share and take a look at what we've got. So back here on our Acknowledge Rediscovery home, on our schedule for Java, unified session schedule, jump down to week 4. Our module this week is user input. And this is a neat module because this is when you get to build in interactivity with your Java programs. And I've got a nice setup for getting NetBeans to work with user input. And I even have a video, so you can, if I can even watch myself. So now you're watching me watch myself. It's a meta video. I explain exactly how the user input scanner works, and I even put some of the code that we're discussing in the video in little pop-ups. So I encourage you to take your time with this unit and work through all the code that I worked through in the video on your own NetBeans project, and make sure that you don't skip over comments. And comments are good to enter in your code. Even if they seem a little extraneous at the beginning, it will help your brain internalize what it is that we're doing. And you'll get to build a simple program that can convert a raw sale value to a total sale value with tax. And I give you as many diagrams and conceptual models as I can to help with this. So remember, this is a serious module, and I encourage you to take your time and read it all carefully. And by way of example, when we think about building objects, this is what I go over in the video, so I'll just do a little overview here. We are in object-oriented programming. Let's see if I can work on my board spelling. In object-oriented programming, we abbreviated OO, object-oriented design, allows us to group pieces of information and operations that work on that information inside of an object and bundle it all up and move it around together. And so the object we'll work on this week is the scanner object, which is not that dissimilar from a barcode scanner that receives input from the environment and inserts it into the program as text. The scanner in Java will receive input from the user and insert it into your variables as Java compatible values. And why this is important is because we make a scanner like this here barcode scanner, and once we have the object, we don't need to remake the object. We can just use it multiple times. And so the exercises will emphasize that we have a special line of code that actually creates the instance of a scanner, which we have here, scanner. What's the type of object? The type of object is scanner. We give that object a name, our instance of it, user input scanner. And then the magic keyword new says, make me a new object. And use the blueprint class called java.util.scanner, which we import at the top of our program before the class. And we tell it what we want it to scan. In this case, system.in is a reference to the input console on your keyboard. And so if I, just for show, so I make my scanner here, and then I can slurp up barcodes all over my house. So you can find a book and scan it, and I'm only using one object, but I can carry out the operation of scanning with just a call to one of the object's methods. So we'll see in the tutorial that we'll use a method like next double to grab a double from the user, or next int to grab an int from the user. Back to it, making an object with the scanner. We then can ask that scanner to scan the type of data that we want from the user. So you'll get a chance to scan numbers and strings. And this will all build up to our activity next week, which will be exciting because it'll get a chance to interact with each other. And so we'll build a program that can evaluate possible friend compatibility. So that's where we're going with the week overview. Module 4 is the topic. And I also included an exercise in the schedule for this week that's called paper compiling, or I call it Be the Compiler. I included both the worksheet and the key, and they're PDFs. And there's 4 little exercises, probably take you about a half an hour. And this is the beginning of that series of exercises that will invite you to attempt to generate what the computer will generate. So I give you instructions up here. I encourage you, if you have a printer, print it off and mark it up as much as you can to keep track of how the variables are behaving inside the system. So here's a little program. There's 4 of them. And you'll notice that the programs all follow a similar pattern of creating variables, operating on those variables. Remember our modulo, that's remainder division. So how many times does 10 go into Mars? Evenly, and then whatever's left over is what this expression becomes. And then each one of these programs will have print lines that dump the value of the variables after they've been operated upon. And you'd write that output over here, and then you can check yourself against the key. Don't click the key until you're ready to see if your brain is getting in the mode of thinking like the compiler is thinking about your code. Because you're interacting with the machine, so the more you can get to know how the machine works, the more successful your programs will be. So give that one a try. And third up is our work forms. So just remember, regardless of how much you got done this week, I'd like you to fill out the work form on Saturday night or before Sunday morning. And so again, this form is just going to ask you what you did, and just use your public first name, say which modules you worked on, your work approach, and then you can give me any feedback. And if we have a peek at our answers from the previous week, we got about 2/3 of folks were able to get that completed. And let's see if we have any questions from there. Where did you go? Here. So we got about 20 responses. Most people are on track, it looks like, with Module 3. Some people are working ahead. We've got some good, healthy commitment, 55%. We're working on, looks like a mean of about 4 hours a week. That looks good. And again, you're pasting in your code directly into that response box. Let's see. Let's see some of the interesting questions we got as a group. I'm going to actually pull this up on the screen so you can take a look. What interests me most in coding is how do you go about solving problems of making what the client you're working for wants. Basically, what parameters the code does. Do you do a flow chart, or just starting cleaning up your code as you go along? That is a great question. And I'd say that is an entire topic of exploration, which is usually when I go in to talk to a client that has needs in the code enforcement department. It's interesting that we talk about municipal code, but in this case, we're in a programming class, so when code enforcement refers to municipal code, and that's what my Java application works on. So when I go and talk with a municipality about their needs, they're often in a point where they have a problem, but they haven't necessarily even mapped that to what could a program do. And so one of the beginning steps is having conversations and hopefully field visits in what the clients are doing. And you as a programmer will find it extremely useful to have that firsthand experience working with the client in their work environment to think about designing the program requirements at the highest level. So you can always sit down and tinker with code, but generally the first step will be to generate a solid list of user requirements that are an outgrowth of the actual workflows of the client. And this is something we work on quite a bit in data analytics, which is clients have problems that they think data can answer, and they may not necessarily know which questions are most apt to be analyzed first or which ones are likely to lead to the best outcomes. Similarly, one of the major issues with user requirements is that some things to solve are small problems that can be solved in a couple of hours, and some are very large. And part of the user requirements involves also prioritizing what it is that the clients need and which can be done first, what are the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, that we can execute and implement quickly, and which ones are going to take more time and money. So that's a great topic. Thanks for asking. Let's see. We had a question about the scanner input and what's going on if it's giving me an error. So a couple of things to note when talking about errors is be sure that you try to paste in exactly what the errors are when you're having problems. So I had an email from a student where they had an issue where they couldn't find a main class, but I didn't get the code and I wasn't quite able to see exactly where the error was flagging from. So the more specific you can be in reporting what errors you have, the more easily we can solve them. So let's try to dig into this question here. Remember, when we're using a scanner, we are using code that somebody else wrote, someone that was part of the Java development team a long time ago. Scanners have been around since the early days of Java. And what we're doing is we're grabbing their library book and allowing our code to read from that library book. And only once we've acquired that book do we then get to use it. Before we can actually make a scanner and use it, we have to make sure that we've imported it. And so the first step that you'll probably need to do, which is often easy to forget because the line occurs way before we ever write the program, is we need to say, go grab me the library book. It's in the Java library, the util section, and the name of the book is scanner. That's a metaphor, but it's not that far off because this is actually called the Java util library, and the scanner is a chunk of code. It's a class that contains a bunch of operations. So once you have that import line, then you can come down here and say scanner, my scanner. This name doesn't matter as long as it follows the naming rules, equals new scanner system.in. And so if I comment out the import line, you'll probably see the error that you were getting, which is cannot find symbol class scanner. So that's because if you don't have the library book, it doesn't know how to make a scanner. So make sure that you've got that import. And you'll also find a trick in NetBeans that if you have an import issue like this, you can actually, it tells you Alt-Enter to show hints. And if you type the name of the class correctly and it's a known class to Java, you can hit add import for Java util scanner, double click it, and NetBeans will write you that line of code, line 8. So hopefully that helps with scanner. And Oracle, clarification on Oracle exercises. I don't know what these are, and it sort of confused me, especially this part of code. So this part of the code is part of that object-oriented design where we want to accomplish the goal of writing code once and reusing that code as much as possible. So starting in CIT 130, we will learn that, let's say you want to design a chunk of code that represents employees that work for an organization. So you might make a class called employee, and all employees have a name and a phone number, but some employees are contractors. I guess by definition, they're not employees if they're contractors. But maybe some are managers and some are part-time. So we would actually make classes that are called child classes, and they will inherit everything that their parent has in them, and then we can customize them from there. So managers have names and phones, same as part-times, but maybe a manager would have some information about what managerial role they take on, what level of hierarchy. Maybe a part-time stores the total number of part-time hours. So Oracle is presuming that you know something about inheritance, and that's just a preview of that. Last couple of questions. No other questions? Oh, good. We've got one about I++ and ++I. So the ++ operators are shorthands for adding or incrementing variables by 1. And so in most languages, there are 2 forms of increment operators. So we're often in the case where we have a variable called int I that we want to use as a counter for something. So we make the variable, and then often in some sort of a loop, we want to increment that variable every time we loop through. So we'll often do stuff in a while loop, and then what we want to do is assign to I whatever I was plus 1. And so we have 2 shorthands for accomplishing this without using an assignment statement. One is called the prefix operator, where we put the plus plus before I, and one is I plus plus. The prefix will add 1 to I and then give us the resulting value to use in an expression. The postfix will give us the value and then increment the value after we have read it. And there are certain use cases where this is required, and I equals I plus 1 is the equivalent of I plus plus. There isn't an easy equivalent of plus plus I. It would be use I on one line and then increment I later. So those are some interesting subtleties of operators. I think that does it for questions, and it's really useful. Thanks for submitting those. And once again, with help, it's really important that you try to not email me technical questions, because the time required, it's almost always the case that with the first question you send me, I'll need a follow-up question to give you a decent answer. Otherwise, I might spend a half hour thinking, imagining what your problem might be, and then you have to reply before I can give you a reply. And suddenly we're 3 days in, and if you give me a ring, I can almost always get back to you within 24 hours, and we can have a conversation. So I encourage you to do that as you come up with issues in doing your Java coding. So thanks again. Hope you have a lovely week, and appreciate your engagement with the class. Thanks.